Well, good evening, everyone. I'm so glad that you're here tonight. We are just really excited. Tonight, we're going to be talking about something that every single one of us has experienced, something we're not too thrilled about, and it's called stress. So it's not just the emotional kind that we feel when life gets overwhelming, but it's even deeper kinds of stress that can affect us physically and even spiritually. So many of us have learned how to push through that stress. We function, we keep going. But what if there's more happening beneath the surface? Well, I'm really excited tonight to introduce one of our favorite friends to you, Carol Roberts. She's amazing. She's a court reporter, a small business owner. She's a first responder family supporter, and she's really passionate about wellness. And so Carol has walked through significant life stress, including serious illness in her family. And through that journey, she began learning about the impact of various forms of stress, including oxidative stress, and what we can do to better support our bodies. So tonight, it's about education, encouragement, and practical tools that you can use in your everyday life. So, Carol, thank you so much for being here tonight. So how about we start with your story? Does that sound good, Carol?
Absolutely. Thank you for asking me to do this. It's an honor just to share. I think anytime we tell our story, it's just an opportunity to hear and learn about somebody else's life. So I'm just honored that you asked about mine.
Well,
So I was introduced to LifeVantage by a dear friend who is on this call, and she knew that our oldest son was going through some treatments for to be compliant, something that starts with C, but you don't really want to see it in anyone, especially your child. What she didn't know was that my mom had been diagnosed with Alzheimer's about the same time. I was very stressed about the whole thing and life in general. But I might share too that my tie to the first responder world, I am married to a first responder, a police officer, who he is has a job that he goes all over the state. So he gets called out at a moment's notice. He's on call 24/7 unless he's taking vacation intentionally. I also have our oldest son, who is the one that was diagnosed with the illness. He is an EMT, first responder, paramedic, firefighter. He is married to our daughter-in-law, who is also an EMT firefighter and works for the coroner's office. Our youngest son is a police officer, so we have service-oriented, thoughts in our family. So, but that's how I came to learn about oxidative stress.
awesome. Well, that's great. And most people think of stress as like emotional overwhelm. How would you define stress more broadly?
Well, there obviously we all know what emotional stress is. Every single one of us knows what that feels like. And but what I've learned is it's not just an emotional state. There's a physiological component to that. It's not just the feeling of overwhelm that we can all relate to. Most of us can function under that form of stress, maybe not well, but we just push through, especially in our world. The first responders are just taught they're the heroes anytime, anywhere, and they're just taught to push through things. But what if we thought of this as a physical metric within the body? Something that you can trace down to even a cellular level. And as we know that there are several types of stress, there's the emotional side, but there's also that physical component, as well as spiritual stress.
Wow. So stress isn't just a feeling, there's really something happening inside the body, is what you're saying.
There is on the cellular level, which I didn't, when I was in school, I was not the science person. Um, Barely made passing grades in science, so I never really understood cellular biology. I will not tell you that I do to the nth degree now, but I have learned kind of that cellular stress isn't something that you can necessarily see, but it is very real. And I know that people smarter than me have discovered that cellular stress, and it's just one theory of aging, right? So, in other words, when your body breaks down, it's happening faster than it can repair. And that's when you find those chronic conditions that pop up and kind of wreak havoc on the body. And that type of stress kind of leaves a footprint, if you will. Even if you're not under emotional stress, your body is still undergoing that cellular stress, which that causes inflammation and slower recovery and fatigue and brain fog and just a weaker immune response, which also, sleep issues are a part of that as well. But what we've learned is if you support your body on that cellular level, people will notice changes and how steady they feel, even just day-to-day things beyond having more energy and maybe having better sleep.
Well, that's really powerful, especially, the idea that we can't see it, but it leaves a footprint. So why do you think so many people disconnect what they feel as stress from what may be happening physically in their body?
Well, I think that as a whole, we are taught to look at how we feel, the symptoms, and I don't think that we're really taught about that cellular stress. At least I don't think I was. Maybe I was sleeping during that time. I don't know. But I don't remember being taught about the concept of on a cellular level, our cells age. Just like, I mean, several of us, we've all probably heard the example of the apple. When you take a bite out of it and set it on a counter, then it turns brown. And to know that that oxidation of that apple flesh is the same thing that happens in the body. And, our culture just prides itself on pushing through things, at least in my world. I think that's pretty universal, though. And I know when activation found me through my dear, dear friend Debbie, I was pushing through all the stressful things, the circumstances that were going on. I knew that, you had to have good hydration and you were supposed to eat healthy and you were supposed to exercise and you're supposed to get the right amount of sleep. But I will tell you, none of that was enough by itself to just keep that physical component of the oxidation from happening inside me. So,
Yeah,
go.
I think you're right. I think that, a lot of times stress puts people kind of in a survival mode. But for somebody listening tonight, what are some signs that they might be experiencing cellular stress, even if they never heard the term before? How might they be able to identify it?
Well, I think it was kind of a light bulb moment for me when I heard that it is a theory of aging. So, I mean, I don't think any of us would argue. I think probably all of us on this call are over 25. Um, you just are familiar with your body declining. And it just makes so much sense when you think about the older you get, the longer it takes for recovery, or the longer it takes to, have the energy, or we may need more caffeine, or, just going through seasons where you just feel tired, you feel that fatigue, and that can turn into chronic fatigue. Maybe it's the whole thing of you walk in a room and you stand there for a minute and you think, why was I here? What was I going to do? I don't remember why I was coming in this room. And that brain fog, that's a real thing. I mean, I remember when my kids were little, I called it mom brain. And I know that's a pretty familiar term for those of us that are moms. You just think, okay, that kid stole my brain somehow, somewhere. But that's a sign of cellular stress. And I think we have just learned that to be normal. But now we know that there are tools to combat that stress. So that's exciting to me.
That is exciting. Yeah, so I think many of us on this call tonight are people of faith. So could you talk about that for a minute? How do you differentiate between spiritual stress and physical stress?
Well, as I mentioned, as a mom, a young mom, raising four kids, I knew what it meant to be physically tired, hands down. I attended church every week. I read my Bible throughout the week. I tried to stay connected to God as best I could. I remember feeling just guilty because whether I was taught this or whether I just thought this, that I was not doing something right spiritually to be so tired, to be so disconnected, to have all these stressful things that felt like, I didn't know what was going on. I didn't feel like I was experiencing God the way that the Bible portrayed him. And I know that that's a connectivity issue sometimes as well for us. But when you're doing all the things and you're still like, I just don't feel this, I remember thinking that there must be something wrong with me spiritually. And fast forward to figuring out these tools to support my cells and reduce that cellular stress. I feel like there are things that have indicated to me, at least, that I feel more connected to Jesus, which I know that's a bold statement, but I remember at one point just thinking, gosh, I just feel like I'm hearing God differently. And I've shared that with a couple of different people of faith. And, it just makes so much sense that when we start healing our body, our mind starts to heal too. And God created us to be connected to Him. I mean, that's what we're here for, is to have a relationship with Him. So I think one ties to the other, but I think when you reduce that physical component, then everything has a cascade effect going up instead of down.
Definitely. I would definitely have to agree with that, Carol. And that's such an important thing to, make sure that we understand. So you mentioned tools that helped you personally. What products have been most impactful in your stress journey?
Well, I will tell you that reducing that cellular stress with a product called Protandim NRF2, it's it's a scientific miracle, I think, it's a gift that God has given us. Um, Between that and what they call the Tri-Synergizer, knowing that you can increase your energy inside and clean all the debris out. That's what I started taking when I found these activation tools. But I will tell you, the liquid collagen has had such an impact on me. And I'm not in the medical field, so I have just a very superficial understanding of the physical component of fight or flight. But we all kind of know that emotionally when you feel like you're backed in a corner. And fight or flight are the two responses to that stress, the body being under stress. And to know that that same thing happens on the cellular level, um, and RF2 helps reduce that stress and help your cells communicate better and increases the body's ability to heal, reduces inflammation, all the good things. But I will tell you, like I said, adding the liquid collagen has made such a difference. And to be honest, I was not super excited about the collagen just because my understanding of collagen, I had never taken it before. My understanding was that it was just kind of a vanity product, and I know that people of faith are probably more aligned with, I just want to live healthy and, if God gives me wrinkles, then it's a sign of wisdom and all the things we tell ourselves. But what I've learned is that collagen is super important. I mean, it's the structural support of the body. So, I mean, I've heard, jokingly, if we didn't have collagen, we'd just be blobs. Who wants to be jello? Right? So, the other thing that I think was really exciting is when you take those two things together, it breaks that response. It breaks the body's response to the fight or flight within our cells. And I think that when you start calming that body's response, then good things happen. Yes, your defense system is still intact, but it's not on all the time unnecessarily. And if we're not being chased by a bear, we probably don't have to be, in that fight or flight all the time. So if you feel more steady and more grounded.
That is awesome. Sounds like something everybody could benefit from for sure. Um, okay, and I know that you also you mentioned some habits that you work on as well, as long as as well as using these powerful products. What are some everyday habits that people can start implementing to reduce various forms of stress?
Absolutely. And I will tell you, just as a caveat, part of these I was already doing. So let me just say that in the big picture, I think starting with that framework of cellular activation or reducing the stress on the physiological body is key. But other things, we're told to exercise regularly, 30 minutes a day, 3 times a week, move your body every day, which, most of us, I have kind of a sedentary job from the standpoint of I am transcribing, and that involves sitting with a foot on a pedal, and I have to be intentional about getting up and moving. And, part of that is running or walking on a treadmill or outside. So good exercise habit. Start wherever you can. Another thing that you can do to decrease your susceptibility to the stress on the body is eating healthy. And I know some people are like my husband and they just roll their eyes and they say, "Oh, you healthy people." But it really does make a difference to eat whole foods, skipping the drive-through as much as you can. And I know that takes planning ahead. Meal prepping is a great habit to establish, just doing things like that. They don't call it the SAD diet, the standard American diet, for nothing. Our, but even if you're eating whole foods and organic where you can, our food is not as nutritionally dense as it used to be. So there again, yes, eat healthy, but just know that there's another layer of that. We talked about sleep, getting a good, proper amount of sleep. What is that? Well, experts kind of vary. I've heard 7 to 9 hours. I try to get at least 7 hours. I wear a fitness tracker that kind of gives you details about your sleep. And I will tell you, as long as I am 85 or above, I feel good the next day. If I slip down below that, which isn't very often, then, you kind of feel tired and draggy the next day. But that's where the body resets and restores. So good sleep hygiene is really important as well. Practicing mindfulness. A lot of us, people of faith, are going to say that's prayer, meditation, um, gratitude. We've been taught by Miss Jackie all the time about having a heart of gratitude and how that affects the mind and the body. So that is, going to reduce that stress on a cellular level as well. Another thing is breath work. And we know that, breathing can slow the heart rate and lower your blood pressure. It has an immediate impact. And I know heard Miss Jackie even talk about when you're sitting in the doctor's office, if you have that white coat syndrome, practice that mindful breathing. It could just be a cadence of breathing in 4, holding it for 7, and then releasing it for 8. And just do that a couple of times. And, like I said, your blood pressure is going to go down and it will make you feel more centered. But I don't feel like I would be doing justice to this topic if I didn't say all these things support that cellular stress reduction, but the activation, the component of using the tools, the natural things that God has already given us, is really going to set the foundation for all those other habits.
Well, those are great tips, Carol. I appreciate that. I do that breath work too, and work on all those other things. And I would have to agree with you though that the activation sets the foundation. So if somebody is feeling a little overwhelmed tonight just about all this information and they're dealing with a lot of stress in their lives, what would you say to them that is just a good thing to get started on?
Well, I know I try to meet people where they're at. So all this information may be new to you, and you've never heard of activation, you've never heard of NRF2, or what in the heck is that acronym? What does that mean? And you might have heard of collagen, you might have heard of some of that stuff, but I to not be overwhelmed. That is going to be stressful, right? That's the opposite of what we're trying to do here. Start with some of those small habits. You know, don't implement everything at once. That is kind of a recipe for disaster if you try to change your whole life all at once. But you can start with small things. If you can, start with that activation because everything else is going to build on that. That is what truly made my difference. The way I felt, my blood work has since improved. I mean, even just getting those blood markers checked, you know, those numbers have improved. But overall feeling of steadiness and being grounded. Again, one of the easiest things to start with is the breath work. That doesn't cost anything except some mindfulness and a little bit of time and intentionality. One thing I forgot to mention too is go outside. We, I know it's cold some places, even just a few minutes. Look at the sunrise. Get your circadian rhythm going. When it gets dark and you're winding down, stay off your screens. Things like that will help improve your sleep. But truly, just choose one thing and start building from there. It's not meant to be overwhelming.
Awesome. Wow, you're definitely sharing a lot of wisdom with us tonight, and we just really appreciate, just all your advice and your recommendations. And so we're going to wrap it up here tonight, and I just hope that you all walk away feeling encouraged. Stress may be part of your life, but it doesn't have to be overwhelming because you heard some things tonight, some practical things that you can implement in your life. And so if you heard things tonight that resonated with you, whether it's about oxidative stress, some of your daily habits or the products that Carol shared that she is saying has been the foundation for her in dealing with stress. We'd love to connect with you personally, and we would encourage you to get in touch with the person that invited you here tonight. And just remember, like Carol said, you don't have to change everything at once because small steps create big results. So thank you so much, Carol, and thank you for everyone for being on here tonight.
Thank you, Julie.